Hi folks, we're going to be putting out a 3-part video on how we make our pumpkin pies. Now, it'll include how to do the crust and actually the filling and how we wound up doing this pumpkin pie in the first time. We did this pumpkin pie originally as part of a feast 2010, and it was a Tudor feast, which means it was all pre-1600s recipes pretty much. This recipe was originally from a 1517 document, and we tried it, and we liked it so much that we ditched the old recipe that we've been using ever since we got married, at that time like 35 years before. So, I hope you enjoy it, and I hope this helps you overcome your fear of making your homemade pie crusts and understand how truly wonderful a pumpkin pie can be. We usually like to get our pies done the day before, so the first thing I'm going to do is make pastry. We've never been particularly fond of store-bought pastry crusts, and in fact my husband didn't really like pastry until we got married, because he'd had a lot of store-bought pastry crusts that were not the greatest. So I make mine from scratch. Not a difficult recipe. 3 cups of flour, some salt, some shortening, and butter. That's it, with a little bit of water. So I have my flour measured out, and I need to sift together the flour and the salt. So I'm going to put some of the flour in here. I've already measured this out. This particular recipe does not require you to sift the flour ahead of time before you measure it. Some do. And I need a teaspoon and a half. Teaspoon of salt. Just sift those together, and what that does is it mixes them up really well, and it makes sure that there's no lumps in the flour and that there's no lumps in the salt, because one of the most common reasons for a salty spot in your crust is if you actually have multiple grains of salt that are sort of stuck together, which if you live in a humid area is a problem. There we go. Now we have the flour and the salt sifted together. I have 1 cup of shortening, which I measured out ahead of time, since I didn't think it was really that exciting for you to watch me mash shortening into a container. And 3 tablespoons of butter. Now, what I've done here is my butter is not as soft as I like it to be. So I'm cheating by cutting it up a little, and that makes it seem as if it's softer. Normally I would have left this out for just a little longer, but I ran out of day, so I had to just go for it. We're just going to cut this in with a pastry cutter. Now that it's cut together well enough, I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of water. commentary. Plus 4 ounces. Our climate is so dry that our flour is sometimes sort of dehydrated more than you would expect. So I'm just going to stir this together lightly. And if it seems too dry to me, and unfortunately that is a matter of experience, then I'll add a little bit more water. I've fine-tuned this recipe over the years so that usually I don't need to add more water. It should be fairly dry. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some saran wrap. Just going to put that down. Double check. Seems moist enough. And pour it out. Now it seems very dry and crumbly, but it will ball together with a little help. The counter is clean, clean, clean. I always do that before I cook, because that way if I drop anything on it I don't have to worry about contamination. I'm just going to smoosh this together. Now, that's not a very technical term, but sort of what I'm doing is I'm sort of gathering it together with my hands and the saran wrap. Try not to touch with it my hands too much, because you'll actually melt the shortening and butter too much, and you won't have some nice crumbly crust later. You won't get the layers of crust that you want. It'll be too difficult. Add another piece of saran wrap to that. You could also put it into a Ziploc bag and do the same sort of thing. The goal is to basically make it pretty airtight. And now we're going to stick this in the fridge for 20 to 30 minutes. It's feeling dough-like, or I should say crust-like, and we're going to let it rest. That way get the moisture all the way through all the flour, and let it turn into something we should be able to roll out. Eggs, ricotta, plain pumpkin, sugar, cinnamon, ginger. That's it. I just got the dough out of the fridge. It's been resting for half an hour. And this is a crust actually, and I shouldn't call it dough. And it's looking sort of like a pie crust should. I'm going to divide it in half because this is actually meant for making 2 pies, crusts, not just one. And I'll cover this one back up because we don't want it to dry out while we're working. Okay, I have a tiny bit of, and this of course is a little too dry today. Okay.
So what happened, Irene?
Well, I'm going to try this again. For the first time in like 6 years, the dough was too dry. So the crust rather was too dry. So rather than mess around with it and wreck it, I put a little bit more moisture back in it and threw it back in the fridge for another 10 minutes. And that should improve things. So here we go again. Yeah, that's not as crunchy. That's good. I used to have a really cool cloth to roll out stuff on, and a special cloth that went on the rolling pin, but it died a couple of years ago. It got real funky, and I decided I could live without it. It means I have to use a tiny bit of flour on the rolling pin sometimes. Sometimes it sticks a little bit more, but the crust still tastes good. So one of the parts that most people mess up with crust is fussing with it too much. You can piece it together, you can do all kinds of things, but you try not to handle it more than you have to, because you'll make it tough. And everybody knows that a tough crust is not a good crust. So, let's see here. This is of course not going to turn into anything round, because it never does. Not even my mom, who was really good at crust, could make a round crust. But you can cut it into a round crust, and that's all that matters. People see the finished product. I'm going to have to piece this unless I can make it squish better. It's not squishing quite right. Close. Got a piece of dough that's stuck to the rolling pin right there. Must have been a spot that was just a tiny bit higher moisture content than the other stuff. There, it's a little better. Okay. Now I'm going to get this to come off the I can cheat a little bit and peel it off there. Because nobody's going to see this. This is going to be the bottom of the pie. So it won't matter if it's not 100% perfect. Of course it's going to get messy because I'm showing someone. If I was in here by myself, just me and the dog, it'd be fine. All I'm doing is lightly pressing it down. Cutting off the extra. And I'll use some of that extra to piece in any holes where I don't want them. I don't actually have any holes in the bottom, which is good. But I have to piece my edges a little. Sometimes you'll need to add a little bit of moisture if you find your dough your crust is not sticking when you go to piece it like that. Today it seems to be sticking okay. So unless it gets fussy, I'll try not to add any extra moisture. Beginning to look like a pie crust. One spot there is a little too thin, so I'll add a little bump on it. And just one more spot to piece, and we'll have a pie crust. Come on.
Jack is responding. He's coming towards you.
Uh-oh. Jack thinks this is a snack for him here. I suppose I could give him a little piece of dough once I'm all done. But not yet. Gotta make sure I've got enough dough to go around first. Yeah, dough wouldn't be bad, would it? Just flour and water and a little bit of sugar and stuff. I mean, salt and stuff. There we go. There's one. Do that one more time. I'm not going to throw this away. I'm just going to move it over. Actually, I'll put it into the other saran wrap that I have over here. So I want it to stay moist because I have something very cool that I do with this that makes the pies look very special. People are always amazed by them. It's super easy. Okay, and here's the other flour. Here's the other half of this. For some reason this actually seems to be like less dough than usual this time. I don't understand why. Which is weird. I usually have a lot more left over. I haven't made it any thicker than usual. Must be instant shrinking flour or something magical. It saw our camera and it instantly shrunk. There we go. No holes anywhere. Just need to add a place over there is a little thin. Let's beef that up a little. Now I don't usually crimp the edge of my pie or do anything else fancy with it, but I do have another trick that I'll show you guys later. Now those two pie crusts are ready. Get the leftovers that I have here. I have the one little batch of leftovers from the first pie crust. Put that in the center here. And then the same with this, because I'm going to do something cool with them. My mom used to make tarts with jelly filling. I still do that sometimes if I'm making a pie and have some stuff left over. There we go. Let this rest for a sec. Now, on to the pie filling.